The last place I expected my life to change was a nearly empty gym just minutes before closing. If someone had told me that one quiet conversation after a workout would completely rewrite the future I thought I had planned, I would have laughed and walked away. But life has a strange way of waiting until your guard is down. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No grand confession. No crowd watching. Just the soft hum of fluorescent lights, rain tapping against the windows, and one look that lasted a little too long to ignore. By the time I realized what was happening between us, neither of us could pretend it was only friendship anymore. My name is James. His name is Tyler. This happened in Portland, where rainy evenings seem to make every silence feel heavier than it should. We both belonged to the late-night crowd at the gym. The people who arrived after work, exhausted but determined, chasing a little peace before heading home. Night after night, our schedules overlapped until familiar faces slowly became familiar lives. At first, it was nothing more than polite smiles. Then those smiles became conversations. Those conversations turned into inside jokes that somehow made even the hardest workouts feel lighter. Tyler was impossible not to notice. He never tried to be the loudest person in the room. He wasn't interested in showing off or competing with anyone. He simply worked hard, encouraged everyone around him, and somehow remembered the little things people forgot. If someone misplaced a locker key, he already had a spare lock in his backpack. If someone struggled through their final set, he stayed beside them until they finished. Quiet kindness came naturally to him. I admired that long before I admitted it to myself. As for me, I spent more time running than lifting. Stretching was always an afterthought, and somehow I always ended up near the cable machines where Tyler liked to train. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it never was. Over the following weeks, our routines became perfectly synchronized. We traded equipment without asking, shared water breaks, laughed about impossible workout plans, passed each other towels after wiping down benches. Everything looked completely ordinary, but underneath those ordinary moments, something was slowly changing. Tyler started asking questions that reached beyond small talk. He wanted to know why I worked such long hours, what kind of music I listened to during long runs, why I always rushed home before anyone else stayed to relax after training. Without realizing it, I found myself answering honestly. He learned that I survived on black coffee, loved old 90s playlists, and often used running to clear thoughts I didn't know how to explain. In return, I discovered that Tyler believed kindness wasn't something people talked about. It was something they practiced every single day. That simple belief stayed with me longer than I expected. Outside, heavy rain covered the streets, turning the city into blurred reflections beneath the streetlights. Inside the gym, only a handful of people remained. We finished one final workout together, laughing through the exhaustion. As we walked toward the locker room, Tyler lightly bumped my shoulder. I smiled and bumped him back. It seemed like nothing, but looking back now, that tiny moment became the beginning of everything. Tyler gave me a small, uncertain smile, but I could still see the question in his eyes. He looked like someone standing on the edge of a decision that might change everything. Before he could speak, I reached for his hand. "You didn't misread this," I said quietly. Not even for a second. The tension in his expression melted away. It wasn't dramatic, just a slow, visible release, as though he had been carrying the same unspoken hope for far longer than either of us had admitted. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us no longer felt uncomfortable, felt honest. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the windows, while the locker room remained wrapped in warm steam and the faint scent of cedar. The gym had emptied, leaving only the quiet hum of the ventilation system. Tyler rested his forehead lightly against mine. "I kept telling myself I was imagining it," he admitted with a nervous laugh. Every smile, every conversation, every reason to stay a little longer after our workouts. I couldn't help smiling. I thought I was the only one doing that. He laughed softly, shaking his head. "So we've both been pretending. For months." The words hung in the air before we both laughed again, this time with the relief that comes when two people finally stop hiding from the same truth. He gently squeezed my hand. "If we take this step," he said, his voice quieter now. Things won't be the way they were. I looked directly into his eyes. I don't want them to be. Something changed in that instant. Not because of one dramatic moment, but because we both chose honesty over fear. The distance we'd carefully maintained for months disappeared, replaced by a quiet closeness that felt surprisingly natural. Every conversation we'd shared suddenly carried new meaning. Every smile, every joke, every excuse to linger after a workout. It had all been leading here. The storm outside slowly began to fade, but inside, time seemed to stand still. Tyler let out a slow breath and smiled in a way I'd never seen before. Completely genuine, completely unguarded. "I've wanted to tell you for so long," he admitted. "I know," I replied softly, "and I've wanted to hear it." For the first time since we'd met, there were no hidden feelings left between us. The locker room that had once been just another stop after training had quietly become the place where two ordinary lives began moving in the same direction. Neither of us knew what tomorrow would look like. There would be questions. There would be challenges. But as we stood there together, listening to the last drops of rain against the windows, one thing felt certain. This wasn't the end of a friendship. It was the beginning of something neither of us wanted to walk away from. The urgency that had filled the room only moments earlier slowly gave way to something quieter, something steadier. Tyler leaned back just enough to meet my eyes, his hands resting gently at my sides instead of holding on so tightly. He stayed close enough that I could still feel the warmth between us, but there was a calmness in him now that hadn't been there before. His expression softened. It wasn't uncertainty anymore. It was wonder. "You're shaking," he whispered with a small smile. I let out a nervous laugh. "So are you." For a second, neither of us moved. Then we both laughed, the kind of laugh that only comes after carrying the same secret for far too long. It broke the last piece of tension between us. Tyler reached for my hand, intertwining his fingers with mine. "I spent months trying to convince myself I was imagining all of this," he admitted quietly. "So did I." His smile grew wider. "I guess we weren't very good at hiding it. Not from each other." The room felt impossibly still. Outside, rain continued to fall against the windows, but inside, time seemed to slow until there was nothing left except the quiet space we shared. We sat down on the wooden bench, shoulders brushing naturally. For the first time since we'd met, there was nothing left unsaid. Tyler looked at me as though he was seeing me for the first time and remembering every conversation we'd ever had all at once. Every smile across the gym, every joke between sets, every excuse to stay a little longer before heading home. "I never wanted this to be just one moment," he said. His words settled somewhere deep inside me. "I didn't either." A peaceful silence followed. It wasn't awkward. It was comforting. The kind of silence that only exists when two people finally stop pretending. After a while, Tyler chuckled softly. "You know," he said, shaking his head, "it's funny how something so ordinary can change everything." I smiled. "Life has strange timing." "It really does." We both laughed again, lighter this time. The nervousness that had followed us for weeks seemed to disappear with every passing second. The gym beyond the locker room had gone completely quiet. The staff had already finished cleaning. The lights had dimmed. It felt as though the entire building had quietly stepped aside, giving us space to begin something neither of us had expected. Tyler looked at me with a confidence I hadn't seen before. "So, what happens now?" I leaned back against the bench, thinking for a moment before smiling. "I think tomorrow morning we'll probably pretend we're not exhausted." He laughed. "And after that? We keep showing up. At the gym." "At the gym," I answered. "And for each other." His smile lingered. "I'd like that." "So would I." For a long moment, neither of us spoke again. We simply sat together, listening to the rain and the gentle hum of the building around us. The storm outside was finally beginning to pass. Somehow, it felt like the same thing had happened inside both of us. Months of uncertainty had quietly given way to clarity. Whatever this was, it wasn't built on impulse. It had been growing through ordinary conversations, shared routines, and quiet moments that neither of us understood until now. As we finally stood to leave, Tyler picked up the towel that had been forgotten on the floor and laughed. "I guess this is the most important towel I've ever dropped." I couldn't help laughing with him. "Remind me to thank it someday." He shook his head, smiling in that familiar way that had first caught my attention months ago. Together, we walked toward the exit. The rain had almost stopped. The streets shimmered beneath the city lights, and for the first time, walking beside him felt less like the end of another workout and more like the beginning of an entirely new chapter. Neither of us knew where the road ahead would lead. But as we stepped into the cool night air side by side, one thing felt absolutely certain. This wasn't the end of our story. It was the moment it truly began. Neither of us moved very far. It was as if we were both afraid that taking even a single step back might somehow break the moment we'd waited so long to reach. Warm steam drifted through the locker room, wrapping everything in a quiet haze. The silence between us no longer felt uncertain. It felt peaceful, filled with everything we had finally found the courage to admit. Tyler was the first to speak. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "James." He searched my face for a long moment before asking the question that had clearly been sitting in his heart for weeks. "Are you going to regret this?" His words settled deep inside me. I realized he wasn't asking about the moment itself. He was asking whether I'd still choose him tomorrow, whether I'd look at him differently the next time we met, whether everything we had built would suddenly disappear. I reached over and rested my hand gently on his shoulder. "No," I answered without hesitation. "Not tomorrow. Not next week. Not a year from now." The relief that crossed his face was impossible to miss. He let out a slow breath and smiled, almost laughing at himself. "I've wanted to tell you for months," he admitted. "Every workout, every conversation, every time you smiled at me, I wondered if I was imagining something that wasn't really there." I smiled. "You weren't imagining it." He shook his head with a quiet laugh. "I wish I'd been brave enough to say something sooner. Maybe we both needed time." He nodded. "Maybe." We settled onto the wooden bench, sitting shoulder to shoulder. Neither of us felt the need to fill every silence anymore. Outside, the rain had become softer, tapping gently against the windows instead of pounding against them. Tyler leaned back and looked toward the ceiling. "It's strange," he said. "What is?" "I always thought the hardest part would be admitting how I felt. And now," he turned toward me with the smallest smile, "now the hardest part is believing this is actually real." I laughed quietly. "It feels real to me." He smiled again, this time with a confidence that hadn't been there before. For several minutes we simply talked. About work. About how many ridiculous excuses we'd invented just to spend an extra few minutes together after training. About all the opportunities we'd both missed because we assumed the other person couldn't possibly feel the same way. Each memory made us laugh a little harder. The nervousness that had followed us for months slowly disappeared. Eventually the steam began to fade, and the mirrors slowly cleared. The locker room looked ordinary again. Only we weren't. Tyler glanced toward the clock. "I guess we should probably head out." "I guess so." Neither of us stood immediately. It seemed almost funny how difficult it was to end a conversation neither of us wanted to leave. When we finally gathered our things, everything felt strangely different. Not awkward, not complicated, just lighter. As we walked through the quiet hallway, the lights near the front desk had already been dimmed. The building was almost empty. Outside, the parking lot shimmered beneath the streetlights, the rain leaving bright reflections across the pavement. We walked side by side without speaking for a while. The silence was comfortable. When we reached my car, Tyler stopped. So, he laughed. "I've been practicing speeches in my head for weeks. And they all sound terrible now." I smiled. "That's because you don't need one anymore." He looked at me for a second before shaking his head with a grin. "You always know what to say. Only when I'm talking to you." He laughed again, and this time there wasn't even a trace of uncertainty in his expression. "I'll see you tomorrow?" I pretended to think about it. Only if you promise not to avoid the cable machines. He rolled his eyes. So you noticed. I noticed everything. His smile answered before his words did. Good, he said quietly, because I noticed everything too. For a brief moment, we simply stood there while the last drops of rain fell from the trees above us. The storm had finally passed. The city felt calm, and somehow so did we. As I opened my car door, I looked back one last time. Tyler was still standing beneath the glow of the parking lot lights, smiling in that familiar way that had first caught my attention months ago. Only now there was nothing uncertain about it. This wasn't the end of an ordinary Tuesday. It was the beginning of a story we would both remember for the rest of our lives. When he finally leaned back, his forehead resting gently against mine, a quiet smile spread across his face. So, he whispered, this is only the beginning, isn't it? I smiled without even thinking. Yeah, I answered. I think it is. The drive across Seattle felt completely different from every ride we'd shared before. Neither of us felt pressured to explain anything. There were no awkward silences, no nervous laughter, just the soft rhythm of rain against the windshield, the steady hum of the engine, and Ethan's hand resting comfortably in mine. Every few minutes, he'd glance my way with that familiar smile, the one I'd caught so many times across the gym but had never fully understood until now. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful, the kind of silence that only exists when two people finally stop hiding from the truth. When we reached my apartment building, neither of us hurried to leave the car. The dashboard lights cast a warm glow across the cabin while raindrops slowly slid down the windows. For a while, we simply sat there. Neither of us seemed ready for the evening to end. I should probably let you get some sleep, Ethan said quietly. His words sounded responsible. His smile suggested the exact opposite. I laughed. You don't really want to leave yet, do you? He shook his head with a sheepish grin. Not even a little. That honesty made both of us laugh. The nervousness that had followed us for months had quietly disappeared somewhere between the gym and the drive home. Now there was only comfort, only certainty. He reached over and gently squeezed my hand. This doesn't feel like one unforgettable night, he said. It feels like the first page of something much bigger. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. Then let's make sure we keep writing it. His smile said everything words couldn't. We stepped out into the cool night air. The rain had faded to a light drizzle, leaving the sidewalks shining beneath the streetlights. Together, we walked toward my front door at an unhurried pace, talking about nothing important and somehow enjoying every second of it. When we reached the porch, Ethan paused. He looked around as though he wanted to remember every detail of the evening. The quiet street, the fading rain, the porch light glowing above us. Then his eyes returned to mine. I don't think I'll ever forget tonight, he admitted. I don't want to. Neither do I. We stood there smiling, neither of us in any rush to say goodbye. Finally, I nudged him playfully. So, you still owe me a proper workout tomorrow. He laughed. After tonight, I think you've earned an easy day. I'll believe that when I see it. He shook his head, smiling. Fair enough. We shared one last hug before he stepped back toward his car. Good night, James. Good night, Ethan. And thanks. For what? For giving us a chance. I smiled. I think we both did. He climbed into his car, waved once more, and slowly disappeared down the quiet street. I stayed on the porch until the glow of his taillights faded into the distance. Only then did I step inside. The apartment felt exactly the same, but somehow everything had changed. For months I'd been waiting for life to move forward. Tonight it finally had. Looking out the window, I watched the last traces of rain disappear into the darkness and realized that sometimes the biggest changes don't begin with dramatic speeches or perfect timing. Sometimes they begin with ordinary conversations, shared routines, a little courage, and two people finally choosing honesty over fear. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't wondering what might happen next. I was excited to find out, and that feeling alone made the future seem brighter than it ever had before. If you've stayed with this story all the way to the end, thank you so much for being here. I genuinely love to hear what you thought. Was there a moment that stayed with you? Did any part of James and Ethan's journey remind you of your own experiences? Or did it simply leave you with a smile? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories about love, friendship, and finding the courage to be yourself, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for the next story. Until next time, take care of yourself, and never underestimate how one honest conversation can change everything.